Welcome to UO Today. I'm Barbara Altman, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guest today is Marga Vicedo, Professor of the History of Biology in the Institute for the History and Philosophy of Science and Technology at the University of Toronto. Vicedo's interests lie in the history and philosophy of biology in the 20th century, especially the history of genetics, evolution, and animal research, as well as the social and ethical implications of new genetic technologies. Another area of her expertise is the history of scientific views about human instincts. In her manuscript, Human Nature and Mother Love, The Search for the Maternal Instinct, she traces the different views about instinctual behavior from Darwin to the present. Her work on instincts has led her to examine the work of psychologists such as William James, John Watson, and Harry Harlow, and psychoanalysts, especially child analysts. She is currently completing a history and critical analysis of the ethological theory of attachment behavior. Vicedo visited the University of Oregon during the week of February 22, 2010, as a guest of Ellen Herman, Professor of History and the Oregon Humanities Center 2009-10 Robert F. and Evelyn Nelson Wolfe Professor in the Humanities. Vicedo participated in Herman's class entitled Sexual Science, Sexual Politics, which was developed during Herman's professorship. Marga, we're very glad to have you here. Welcome to UO Today.
Thank you.
I know you're just here for 3 days, so it's good of you to take time to speak with us.
Thanks for inviting me. Thank you.
Now, I have to say that before I started reading your work, I had never read the term ethology. Could you define it, please?
Yeah, basically ethology means the science of animal behavior. I mean, Darwin talked about animal behavior, but as a science or a scientific field, we can think that it started after, some of the work was done before World War II, and then it was cut by the war, and the science flourished again after the war with the work of Nico Tinbergen and Konrad Lorenz, who got the Nobel Prize for developing this field in 1973. So it's, you know, it's a new scientific area. That doesn't mean there was no work on animal behavior before the war, but as a field, it started after the work with these two major ethologists.
So how does it grow out of the work of Darwin then?
Yeah, well, Darwin, as you know, put us in a continuum with animals in the sense that, you know, we are all animals and the result of the same evolutionary process. So in that sense, any work on animal research becomes more interesting to understand also human behavior, because there is no the dichotomy that before Darwin it was understood, well, animals are moved by instincts and humans are moved by intelligence and reason. I mean, Darwin tells us we're all in a continuum and we all come from common ancestors. So in that sense, instinctual behavior is important to understand human behavior. And therefore also there is more interest in understanding how other primates and also other animals behave in order to understand ourselves. So.
And it goes the other way as well, right? We can understand more about human behavior by studying the behavior of other animals?
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, with also the caveats that there are risks of doing this and extrapolating from one species to another. I mean, as you know, often we talk about the problems of anthropomorphism, which is, you know, when we look at animals and we see them acting in a way that is the way we see ourselves acting. So perhaps we explain certain behaviors in animals by them being jealous or being aggressive. And, you know, the problem is, or the question is, how much of ourselves do we see in the animals? And the other way around. I mean, often, you know, historians also talk about the problem of zoomorphism, which is when, you know, in humans, we just extrapolate animal behavior or ideas that we have about the behavior of certain animals, and we assume it happens the same way in humans. Let's say we do certain experiments with a species of monkeys, and we say, okay, you see, this is what's going on there. This explains how we act as well. And so there is a continuum, but we also have to keep in mind that each species is different, and we cannot simply extrapolate from one to the other. So.
Now, I know you're a philosopher of science and a historian of science, and you've published a lot on these pioneers in the field. So I looked at an article of yours on Harry Harlow, for example, and then one on Konrad Lorenz. How did they push this forward? What are the contributions of Harlow and Lorenz in particular?
Well, Konrad Lorenz, I'm sure you remember his most famous image is both when he was young and then later in his life when he is old and he is wearing his beard, and you see him walking with a bunch of small ducks, infant ducks or geese behind him. So this image is the most iconic image of the field of ethology, and it represents what it is, the phenomenon of imprinting. Imprinting is the process whereby a duck or certain species of birds, but Lorenz did most of his work on ducks or geese, and when they are born, they follow the first object that moves. So that's why they are following Lorenz. And this is the process of imprinting. They imprint on the first object they see, and it is very interesting because if they don't imprint on a member of their species, later on, these ducks or geese will not develop the standard behavior of their species. Like, for example, it sounds funny, but when they grow up, these ducks will try to copulate with Lorenz because they think he is one of them. So this phenomenon was extrapolated by Lorenz and done by other people like John Bowlby to try to understand the attachment of infants to their mothers. So, and try to postulate that it is very important, to put it simply, that the infant attaches to the right individual, because if there is not this bond, there could be problems in the emotional development of the infants later on. So Lorenz did not work with humans, but his work on imprinting was extrapolated to the human realm, and whether rightly or wrongly, it's a different question, but that's of all the work he did. And he also did very important work on aggression. But in terms of the areas that I've worked on maternal instinct and mother love, imprinting is certainly the phenomenon that captured the scientific and the public imagination. And Harry Harlow did experiments with rhesus monkeys, trying to figure out why is it that infants have an attachment to the mother. Because at the time that he performed his research in the early 50s, the standard account was the one provided by Freud and also other psychologists, which is the mother provides the infant with food. Therefore, the infant develops an attachment to the mother because the mother fulfills this primary need. So the love of the infant for the mother is a secondary need because it only happens through the fulfillment of the primary one, which is eating. And other people like Lorenz and like John Bowlby thought, well, no, maybe having an attachment itself to the mother is itself a primary need. It's not that, in humans we love our mothers because they feed us. It's because we need to be loved by them. So that itself is a primary need. And Harry Harlow tried to figure out whether it was the food or another factor what influenced the infant rhesus monkeys. And he performed this experiment, which became super famous. It's still in all psychology books today, where he raised the infant monkeys with what he called mother machines, which were like literally two dolls with different faces, and one of them provided milk or food, and the other didn't provide the food. And what he discovered is that the infant monkeys took the food, but immediately went to the other mother. So he concluded that, what he called contact comfort is what was at the basis of this attachment to the mother. I have to say that, in my work on Harry Harlow, I discovered a much much more complex story, because most of the accounts of these experiments end up there, and they say, you see, Harlow proved that we need an attachment with the mother, that it's not through the food, and that all children to develop into healthy individuals emotionally will need this love from the mother. But Harlow continues his experiments for many, many years, did many variations of them with other substitute mothers, with other, and with peers. And I think it's fair to conclude that at the end, if you look at all the experiments over time, and not only at the initial experiments, which are the ones which are represented everywhere, he concluded that for an adequate infant development, the peers were just as important, if not more. So he did many experiments with different variations where he raised the infants with mothers and no peers, or with peers and no mothers, or any variation thereof. And he literally concluded that even without mothers, with abusive mothers, if the infants then were given infant research monkeys and allowed to play and allowed to have friends, to put it that way, they could overcome abusive mothering and even no mothering at all. Whereas it doesn't happen the other way around. I mean, if the infant is raised only with one of these mother machines and does not go out there and play with his friends, or becomes sort of a member of a larger community, when the infants grow up, they are incapable of having the adequate sexual responses, and they literally go to a corner and don't interact with other monkeys.
This is all part of what is known as attachment theory,
Yeah,
is that right?
Exactly, yeah.
And so the work of these men who were working with primates, rhesus monkeys, and also with geese and ducks, it actually has had a real effect on our understanding of human bonding.
Oh, it has. I mean, and so attachment theory, which was developed by John Bowlby and later Mary Ainsworth, was first based on both observations and experiments on children, and they put forward the idea that children, the mother, to put it in the words of John Bowlby, the mother is the psychic organizer. So literally the mother, or the bonding to the mother, allows the brain of the child to develop in the normal way. And you can see that this is an idea that I think is very prevalent in society. I mean, we think mothers have a determinant effect. I don't know how much television you watch, but if you watch, I don't know, Law and Order, CSI, any movie where there is, they are dealing with criminals or pathology, serial killers, sooner or later, we see that, you know, usually it's a bad guy, and the bad guy did not have a mother, or the mother was in drugs, or it was abusive. So we believe that a lot of the later personality can be traced back to critical period in infancy. And this, you know, is the result of these scientific studies in which John Bowlby, taking the ideas from Lorenz about imprinting, constructed what he called the ethological theory of attachment. So in that sense, relying on the authority of animal behavior and animal research, that's why he called it, I mean, we know it today as attachment, but the full title is Ethological Theory of Attachment Behavior, meaning that attachment that they discovered in children, it's based, I mean, it's supported by also animal research. And they usually appeal also to the work of Harry Harlow to support this. So if you look at many psychology textbooks, I mean, you see there are three of them, Harlow, Lorenz, and Bowlby, as being the three main supporters, or the basic research leading to these views. But I have to say that in my work, as I mentioned before, I've discovered this is a much, much more complex story. And a lot of the research that was done on children, for example, on orphanages, or research done on prisons, or in situations in which children don't have the mother or only have the mother partially, has been either discredited or found insufficient. The work of Harlow, as I just mentioned, is much more complex. Does not necessarily show that the mother is absolutely necessary. And there is a question of whether you can extrapolate work like in printing done on dogs to human beings. So I'm actually quite critical of the foundations of attachment theory. And perhaps I should say that that doesn't mean that I don't think mothers are important. Of course they are, you know, or that mother love is not important. Mother love, like any other kind of love, is wonderful. But we should keep in mind that what attachment is saying is not that having a good mother is nice, which nobody can debate, you know. What they are saying is much stronger, is that without maternal care and love, children will become criminals or will develop pathological behaviors. So this is a much stronger claim. I mean, people probably before their work and much earlier thought that mothers played a key role in the formation of children and in their emotional and moral development. But what is new with this attachment theory is that now it is presented as a biological need. It's not that children will do better if they have a nice mother. It's that children have an instinctual or innate need for mother love.
Well, so let me ask you then, do you believe that? Are you a proponent of the theory that there's an instinctual need for mother love?
No, I'm not. I mean, no, but I don't know whether we have such an instinctual need. But what I claim in my book is that the research claiming this is not good enough. I mean, as a historian, what I look is at the historical development and of these ideas, and I hope my history stands on its own, regardless of my conclusions at the end about the value of the theory, which is a different step. But the result of this historical research has led me to believe and to argue as well that that the support for attachment theory is not sufficient. I mean, that doesn't mean that there is such an instinctual need. We may in 50 years or next year discover that new evidence that supports this view. All I'm saying is that the work of Harry Harlow does not support it because it actually shows that peers are just as important or more, that the work done on dogs cannot be simply extrapolated, you know, to humans, and that the work done on children, it's not really either the statistical sample is not sufficient or the results have not been reproduced. Some of the work has been questioned. So, you know, I don't have evidence to claim that, no, we don't have an innate need for mother love. We might very well have it. But the work that has been done claiming that is not sufficient to support this idea.
Got it. But in the meantime, that very deeply held belief that we see played out on TV all the time, that it's either to the mother's credit or it's the mother's fault how someone turns out, that has a real impact on social policy and on psychoanalytic treatment, right?
Yeah.
How do you see it playing into social policy, for one
Well,
thing?
it does. It has, you know, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's important to understand the development of these views, because, you know, sometimes people tell me, oh, mother love, you know, as a historian of science, it seems like a funny topic. But really what we believe about this has very important implications. For example, for questions of adoption. Obviously, if you think that for an infant the mother is absolutely necessary, then the infant is or the child is going to go to mothers, not to fathers. For questions of adoption, I mean, for a long time, children were adopted, you know, in later years once they knew a little bit about the child. Now they are adopted very early because we believe children need to attach right away. So questions about whether to place children in institutions or with their families, even when their families are not treating them very well. All these areas basically on how to rear and how to take care of our children are influenced by what we believe about mother love, including child care in, in the family. I mean, for example, all these scientists have studied, their ideas at the time were very debated in the wider society because they were proposed in the 1950s when there was a huge debate about whether mothers of young children could and should work. I mean, if you remember, during World War II, women were asked to go out and work outside the home to support the war effort. And in fact, there was an unprecedented movement of women. And after the war, when the men returned, women were asked to go back to the home. And there was a very heated debate about, whether women were absolutely necessary to raise their children. So all these scientific ideas are really part of a larger social debate about, well, what's the best for our children and who should rear them and can they have a mother? Is it a problem if they have several mothers or fathers, if they have a variety of caretakers or they need only one? What happens in questions of custody, divorces, questions of orphans. So it does have a very strong impact.
What about in the realm of psychoanalysis? I know you've worked particularly on children's analysis, right?
Yeah. In psychoanalysis, it's interesting because when John Bowlby, who was a psychoanalyst and a psychiatrist from England, proposed the ethological theory of attachment behavior, his ideas were mostly rejected. And for example, Anna Freud, who had worked a lot with children, she claimed that, well, you could not just reduce infants' needs or anybody else's needs to biological instincts, because you need to realize that when you do this, you make psychoanalysis dispensable. If all it matters to understand our behavior is biology, well, you don't need psychoanalysis. But it's not only because you need, she was defending her field, although probably there was some of this as well, but because, as she, in my opinion, rightly put it, psychoanalysis doesn't deal with the biological basis of our mind. It deals with what our mind does with the biology. We may have urges or drives which are biologically based, whether, the instinct for survival or reproduction or sex or even mother love. We may have instinctual needs. But the question is, when those needs or urges or drives, influence our brain, how do all of us deal with them? Obviously, we act in different ways, and you can act upon an urge, or you can repress it, you can sublimate it. So biology is not deterministic at this level. It may, give us certain capabilities and certain dispositions. It may show that we have certain drives, but what matters to psychoanalysis is what each one of us does with those. And our dreams, our hopes, the way in which we sublimate or we act or we repress them, and that's a part that biology cannot explain or deal with. So in that sense, many psychoanalysts rejected Bowlby. Now, interestingly, as attachment became, for a variety of complex historical reasons, became successful and has been adopted more widely in psychology textbooks, I see now many psychoanalysts who support it. But I think in this, they are wrong. I mean, I side with Anna Freud. I mean, you cannot simply deal with the biology if you want to do psychoanalysis. You have to deal with how is it that each individual's mind deals with those drives that may be universal, they may be biologically based, but don't determine the way we act. So,
what was the topic that you took up with Professor Herman's class? Were you speaking about these same general issues with them?
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
I expect the students have a lot to say.
Oh, I was pleasantly surprised because first I thought, okay, maybe many students will feel, oh, mother love, who cares? It sounds like a sort of, I don't know, soft topic. There are many guys in the class, but I think they very quickly also realized that it's a topic that has very important implications for social policy, also for how we understand ourselves as human beings. I mean, if you look at the news, not only on this topic, but there are more and more news about how biology influences behavior. Almost every day you can read in the newspapers that they discovered a gene for obesity, a gene for aggression, a gene for risk-taking, and what this could all possibly mean, and in which ways, does it help us understand the way we act, and the fact that some people do very risky activities and others don't. So I think they pretty much pretty soon realized that besides the particular topic that I've chosen to focus on, understanding how biology relates to behavior and how behavior relates to emotions, which are three different levels. No, you have the behavior is all we see. All I can see is whether you move, you talk, you eat, you act. That's all I can see. But then we can postulate the level of the biology underlying that behavior. We can also deduct from your behavior which feelings or emotions you have. But understanding how these three levels are related, it's fundamental to understanding who we are as human beings. So it's a big topic, but I think they got very interested. Yeah.
Marga, one last very quick question. We're almost out of time. You come at this from a unique perspective. You've done 2 doctorates. You've written hundreds of pages.
Yeah.
How would you characterize, very briefly, the competence you bring to this?
Well, I started in philosophy of science, and I then did history of science. And I think it's that the confluence of those, the analytical capabilities, or doing philosophy and analyzing the evidence for an argument, the underlying things, and then the historical development of the ideas, what, is my strength in understanding these topics.
I've very much enjoyed reading your work, and I've learned a lot from it. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you have a great visit in Eugene.
I will. It's a wonderful place. I'm very impressed with the place. Thank you.
Good, thank you. We've been speaking with Marga Vicedo, Professor of the History of Biology in the Institute for the History and Philosophy of Science and Technology at the University of Toronto. Thank you for watching.